A lot of people believe that logic and rationality are reliable methods of discovering the truth. It can certainly help with communication and understanding in many ways, but it really depends on what we're talking about. As far as deeper understandings go, logic and rationality form a limiting belief system when they're held too tight. Have you noticed that you and everyone else can use logic to rationalize and justify all sorts of nonsensical bullshit? In fact, isn't this exactly what people do when you point out their bullshit? Don't they use logic to defend and rationalize their position? Isn't logic and rationality what lawyers use to keep criminals out of jail? It doesn't necessitate whether or not the position is right. You're the one weighing out the logic on each side of the scale. This weighing is a matter of personal opinion. Ever notice how two people, scientists even, can look at the same evidence and reach different conclusions? It's because we're using our own special blend of logic, experience, and preconceived notions. This weighing out of the evidence process involves using a limited amount of information, which is why logical conclusions change over time when new information is presented. Logic is what people use to justify and explain their ideas, beliefs, and emotions. Have you ever used logic to convince yourself to do something that you already knew was a bad idea? Ever gotten into an argument with a teenager that the teenager started winning by using logic? Logic and data is what we use every time we conclude a drug like thalidomide, fen-phen, or Vioxx is safe for human consumption. Logic can be used by religious people to explain the existence of God. Logic can be used by atheists to explain the non-existence of God. Logic, reason, and rationality are an extension of human thought and are fallible just like other human ideas. I really hope you can see this, but it's so basic that people just gloss right over it and miss the point. Either that or it's too painful to admit this truth after they've built a life around their imagined certainty. Perhaps finding truth in an ocean of information and misinformation is not a matter of mechanical thinking and deferring to authority. Perhaps intuition and connecting the dots in the absence of sufficient evidence is a valuable skill. Perhaps it's the balancing force to logic and mechanical thinking. Logic shares the same gigantic blind spots that human knowledge and perspective does. Again, logic is what people use to justify and explain their ideas, beliefs, and emotions. We're always operating from a position of limited information. You cannot use logic to prove anything. The fundamental nature of reality is paradoxical and illogical. I really hope you get that, but you'll probably need to experience this directly before it becomes obvious to you. I don't know, bro. Sounds kind of dangerous encouraging people to question science and rationality, don't you think? I get this kind of stuff a lot. But isn't science all about questioning things? Isn't science full of danger? How many scientists have died on perilous expeditions, research projects, and from things that they created in their labs? How many innocent people have been killed by the developments of science? To me, it looks like science and technology are perpetually solving the problems created by science and technology. In the highly leveraged, limited information position that we're in, we often solve one problem and create three more. I think a misunderstanding of what science is and not questioning it is far more dangerous than questioning it. Science is a force multiplier, a tool of leverage, and it's being used by a collective consciousness that's still in its infancy. Ideally, we would be progressing with our research in science much slower than we have been. We still haven't learned how to run without losing our balance, yet here we are running with scissors. Running is a silly idea at our current level of development, but what do we do when everyone is in a big hurry to win at this unsustainable race that leads to collapse? I'm pointing out these limitations of science not to tear it down, but to build it up into something more encompassing, less corrupted, and less biased. I'm spending all this time going over the fundamental nature of human knowledge and progress because I want you to understand why it's so difficult to make sense of nutrition science and many other things in this world. If you'd like to transcend the current collective level of thinking, maybe because you'd like to help solve the problems created by it, it's important you learn how to think for yourself, experiment for yourself, and connect your own dots. This is a spiritual growth course. When I look back at what was preventing my spiritual awakening, it was my belief system. My former belief system could best be described as scientifically oriented rational atheism. This is a big part of why I suffered for so long and couldn't awaken. Nothing wrong with this belief system in particular as compared to other belief systems. It has its strengths and it has its weaknesses. But the larger fundamental problem is that beliefs form the walls and limitations of your consciousness. When someone is convinced that their educated best guesses, which were made using limited information and a number of assumptions, when someone becomes convinced that these conclusions are indisputable facts, this becomes the dictionary definition of dogma and forms ideologies. Science in its purest form is not an ideology, but when people misunderstand what it is and what its conclusions mean, it becomes one. The same can be said about religion and the rest of human beliefs and knowledge. All that anyone ever has is an educated best guess based on limited information. And you must make assumptions to even get that far. Everything in existence is relative and based on perspective. No one has objective facts. All is opinion based on perspective. Objectivity is imagined just as subjectivity is. What was here first, the earth or consciousness? Most scientifically oriented people will answer that the earth was here first. It was a ball of unconscious hot magma. One thing led to another. Something we still can't explain happened, and life sprung forth from non-conscious, non-living matter. If it's still not obvious, this is a belief. It's a theory with a hole in it as big as any other creation story. Why do we insist the earth is not a conscious intelligence when it gives birth to conscious intelligence? Even if we say life came from another planet, that still doesn't answer the question of what was here first, matter or consciousness. There's no way to prove that matter was here before consciousness or vice versa. It requires faith to believe either and build the rest of your explanation for reality on top of it. We have 100 years worth of double slit experiments demonstrating that matter behaves differently depending on whether or not someone is watching it. Why are we still leaving consciousness out of our explanations for how the universe behaves and believing that our answers will still be accurate? We're entangled with the thing we're trying to measure and observe. This is what the most brilliant scientists have been trying to communicate to the other scientists for centuries now, but it's something that cannot be communicated with words or symbols. Max Planck is a Nobel Prize-winning physicist who laid the foundation for quantum theory. Here's a quote of his which really gets to the point. I regard consciousness as fundamental. I regard matter as derivative from consciousness. We cannot get behind consciousness, says the guy who used this perspective on the world to revolutionize physics. This is where breakthroughs come from, thinking outside the box, because the box is imagined and reality is infinite. I hold my beliefs much more loosely now because I've seen them shattered enough times in my awakening experiences. That's what awakening is, transcending your previous belief system and its limitations. You'll find more encompassing belief systems as you grow, and you won't hold them as tightly. These more encompassing, big picture perspectives will allow you to see that even belief systems that appear to be in contradiction with each other can in fact both be true in a paradoxical, infinite universe based on relativity. When you awaken, the walls come down and you realize that reality is infinite. You'll realize what infinite truly means and the tremendous implications of that.